go ahead and get started. So welcome to Lab at Home with the Museum of Life and Science. As always, we hope that you will help us lead our program with your questions and thoughts and ideas in our moderated chat box, because it's always more fun when it's a little bit more of like back and forth communication. Today in Lab at Home, we are kind of finishing up. We're doing the last installation in our series Lab Before Time, which is a series on prehistoric science. Our first week, we studied we looked at bacteria, and we set up our own Vinogradsky columns. I just wanted to give you a little update on mine. It's only 2 weeks old, so I don't see some of those more exciting colors of bacterial colonies, but I have my column here, and I just wanted to note that my water on top was looking pretty green. So I think that that's some of that photosynthetic or light-eating cyanobacteria that we were talking about 2 weeks ago. So I was really excited to see that, and I'll see how it continues to develop over the weeks. That was our first one. Our second Lab Before Time, that was last week. We talked about dinosaurs, and specifically how dinosaurs may have sounded, how they may have made noise, and we made a lot of noise. And then this week, we're talking about, the title is Bugs and Blossoms. And that's because when we go back far enough, it's hard to talk about one without the other. So I want to ask all of you, what do bugs or insects, what do bugs have to do with flowers? What do you think? This is a question for all of you all. What do bugs have to do with flowers? What do we think? Any kind of relationship between them? Do they help each other? Do they not help each other? What do you think? What a great word. Yes, they have a pollination relationship. So insects are pollinators for flowers. And I should say they're not the only pollinators. There's other things that pollinate flowers, such as bats and sometimes even lizards. But insects are a big pollinator for flowers. So if we're talking about something like a flower, we're going to need to talk about bugs as well when we're thinking far, far, far back in time, like millions of years ago, and how both bugs and flowers are starting to evolve. So we're going to be using this term, evolve, or evolution, and I was wondering if all of you have, or any of you have any ideas about what evolution is, or maybe just what it makes you think of. What does that mean, to evolve? What do you think? If something evolves, is it staying the same? Or is it changing? What do you think? So evolution, we're going to say, is when living things, organisms, are changing over time. Specifically, it's their DNA, the things that make them are changing over time. And they change over time to help this living thing to survive in its environment. There's a couple different things that change DNA over time and end up helping organisms, living things, survive. And we're going to be talking mostly about natural selection. So I'm going to go ahead and switch to experiment cam really quickly, because I have kind of a visual way we might understand natural selection. So I'm going to switch, there we go. I'm switching to experiment cam, and I've got a couple of buttons here on kind of a forested background. And I want to ask you to imagine something with me as we're thinking about natural selection. Let's pretend that these buttons are living things, that they are living organisms. They're little button creatures, and they live in this environment, which we're going to say is kind of a dark forest environment. And they're all the same species, but they look different, just like all organisms look different. They have slightly different DNA. Some of them are darker colored, and some of them are lighter colored. If we have some sort of animal in this environment, like my hand, that eats buttons, right? This imaginary creature that eats these button creatures, do you think that it's going to have an easier time finding some buttons over others? What do you think? Do you think that if we just go by color, right, maybe this animal navigates by sight, do you think this animal would find it easier to eat the light colored buttons or a darker colored button? What do you think? Yeah, I agree. I think that it's going to be able to see the lighter colored buttons more easily. So if it eats a bunch of the lighter colored buttons, and there's only a few of those lighter colored buttons left, it's more likely that future generations of button creatures are going to share the DNA of the darker buttons, right? Because these are the ones that survived. So they're going to be the ones that pass down their DNA. That means their button babies will look a little bit more like them because it helps them survive in their environment. So we're saying that evolution by natural selection, there I am, we're saying evolution by natural selection is when you adapt, right? If an organism can change in a way that helps it survive in its environment, then it's more likely to pass on its DNA to the next generation, and the next generation will have those traits because that's what's in their DNA. So things change over time in order to help them survive in their environment. And we should say that there's a lot of different environments on Earth, right? There's kind of not one ultimate adaptation. There's not one ultimate way to evolve. It's not like it's on a set course. It's just that different traits help you in different kinds of environments, right? That's why we find different kinds of living things in all of the different ecosystems on Earth. Okay, so we talked a little bit about how things change over time and how they're going to change according to what helps them survive. Let's get back to talking about insects and flowers. So if we're talking way, way back in time, like millions of years, I wanted to ask you all, do we think between a flower and an insect, do you think one is older than the other? Do you think that flowers evolved first? Or do you think that insects evolved first? Or do you think they came at the same time? What do you think? Flowers first or insects first? What do you think? I'm really interested to see what you guys think because I had an idea, and you can just guess. I know that I just had a guess that I thought made sense to me. And then when I did some more research, I was really surprised to find the answer, at least as far as scientists have been able to study. So I see a guess for flowers. Sure, we think that maybe flowers came first. Any other ideas? What do you think? Flowers? Insects? So I have to tell you, I thought, we have another guess for flowers. I thought that flowers must have come first. I always think about like there must have been plants and flowers before insects. But I learned that actually insects evolved first and flowers came later. Flowers actually came really, really late, right? Our first insects we're gonna see around 400-ish million years ago, but we're not gonna see flowers until about 130 million years ago. That's in the Cretaceous period. That means that we're not seeing flowers until we're seeing dinosaurs, which is crazy to think about. And I should say there were plants, right? There were plants, and there have been plants for maybe 150 million-ish years. So plants are pretty old. There were plants before there were insects, but those plants did not have flowers. They had to make more of themselves using kind of a different way, right? Like a lot of kind of our older plants, our oldest species of plants are going to be things like kind of like a modern pine tree. They kind of have their seeds out in the open there. A ginkgo tree is another example of a really kind of ancient species. Magnolias are also a really ancient species. So their way of making more of themselves, of passing down their DNA, was using those seeds. And it's only later when we're going to see the use of pollen and insects as they have kind of this modern relationship of pollination. We'll talk about that in just a second. So we're saying that, that between flowers and insects, the insects came first. So I was really interested. I thought maybe we could do kind of a project together where we are building an insect, because we're thinking about what are the best traits for a flower to have to attract an insect? What does this insect look like? And how can a flower use the way that an insect looks to make more of itself, to make more flowers? So I don't know about all of you, but I had a chance to run outside my apartment and gather some natural materials to kind of build this insect that I'm going to be making. I have a couple things like leaves. I've got, I had some acorn caps that I found. I have some sticks. I have some slightly different kinds of leaves. And then I also have a little bit of clay. I have a little bit of Play-Doh here, and that's going to kind of be the body of my insect that I'm going to make. So I'm going to go to Experiment Cam, and let me know if any of you are going to be doing our experiment with us, because I would love to see if any of you are following along. So I'm going to take out my clay to start with the body of this insect, because remember, we're making this insect so that we can be thinking about what traits the insect has that a flower could use to make more flowers. Oh, we do have someone following along. That's awesome. So I have 3 balls of clay here, and it's okay if you don't have 3 or if you have more, but I was thinking about if we think about a true insect, so something that's, when we say bug can mean an insect, it can also mean an arachnid, it could mean a worm or a millipede or all kinds of different kind of invertebrates, things without backbones. But if we're saying insect, a true insect looks a certain way. And one of the ways that a true insect looks is that they have 3 body segments, right? They have their head, they have their thorax, and they have their abdomen. So I think I'm going to make a slightly different insect that I made for Little Lab this morning. I made one this morning, and I want it to look a little bit different now. So if you're doing this along with us, I would say go ahead and create just the body of your insect. And yours doesn't have to be an insect. It could be something a little bit more like a butterfly, or it could be something a little bit more like a spider, an arachnid. I think this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to have this big round head and kind of a longer body. So I want to be able to pick my my creation up and move it around a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use some sticks to attach all of my segments together. So I'm going to take a stick here, and I'm going to attach my abdomen to my thorax. And then I'm going to attach the head to the thorax as well. All right, so that means that I can move my little insect around. And I have a question for all of you. What should come next if we're saying this is our insect's basic body? What else does it need? Does it need some way to get around in the world? What else does it need? What do you think? I think when I'm thinking about other insects or other kinds of bugs that I've seen, it has to have some way of moving around, especially if I'm thinking about the kind of insects who are pollinators. They need to have a good way to kind of move around from flower to flower. So I think for starters, I'm going to give my insect legs. For a true insect, right? For an insect by the strictest standards, they have 6 legs. So I have 5 here, 6 sticks that I'm going to use for legs. Now these are kind of short. I don't know, maybe I'll have some different size legs just for fun. I think I'm going to have 2 long legs, and then I'll have some other short ones behind it. I'm not making any real kind of insect, I'm just making one from my imagination, but it still has some of the traits that real insects do. All right, so here we go. We have my insect right now. It has 6 legs, it has 3 body segments. What else does it need? What do you think? Can you think of something that a lot of pollinators have that help them go from flower to flower pretty easily? And it helps them to move pretty quickly and to move pretty far around? What do you think? What do they have? They have legs, so the legs help them move, but what else do they have? What do you think? They have some wings, right? Not all pollinators have to have wings, but many of them do, and that's what helps them spread the flower's pollen so widely. So I want to give this guy some wings, and I'm going to use some leaves to make those wings. I have kind of my two sets of wings here. You could do one big set of wings, you could do some little sets of wings. A lot of different insects have two sets of wings, right? Like a big set and then a smaller set. So I think I do like that idea. I like having some smaller ones here in the back and then some bigger ones at the top. Now I'm putting them in my middle segment, my thorax here, because in a true insect, that's where we would find the wings, but you can put them anywhere you would like, because we're just thinking about a theoretical insect here. So here we go. I have made kind of an interesting looking insect here. So right now it's got wings, and its wings are actually a little bit more maybe like a butterfly's wing, in that they don't really seem to be pointing in the same direction. I guess also their beautiful color makes me think of a butterfly's wing. Butterflies are, they are pretty ancient, by the way. Butterflies are older than flowers, so they're another one of those type of bugs that are older than flowers. So I've got some wings, I've got some legs. This insect is pretty good at getting around. What is something else that my insect might need? How could my insect perceive the world? How can my insect know what's around it? What do you think it needs? What do we think? Does it have any kind of sensory organs? Ooh, I agree. I think it needs some eyes. I agree with you. I wanted to use these acorn caps as eyes, just because when I was looking at them, I noticed that they have something about them that makes me think of real insect eyes. They're these circles that have, these acorn caps are little circles that have these little bumps on them, and that reminded me of how a compound eye looks in a bug. So many bugs have compound eyes. They have little eyes inside of their bigger eye. That helps them see tons of things. Sometimes different bugs can see more light than humans can, more types of light. So they're really good at seeing here, or at least this one is. I like that it has those two big eyes, those two big compound eyes. This is starting to look a little bit more like a bug. What do you think? How is my bug going to eat? How could we get our bug something to eat? What do you think? Especially if we're talking about bugs' relationships with flowers, because it's all about food, right? We know that our bugs need to get nectar and pollen from flowers. That's kind of the basis of their whole pollination relationship. Yeah, I agree. I think it needs a mouth. Now there's a couple different mouth parts we could use. We might use ones that are a little bit more like pinchers, like this, right? These are called mandibles, so they kind of help guide the food into the insect's mouth. Oh, Vern, this is a wonderful addition. Was saying that a praying mantis has a big compound eye. That is exactly right. They have those eyes, and if you look closely at, for example, a praying mantis's eye, it looks almost like little pixels in there, and all of those different little shapes inside of there are like little eyeballs inside of a bigger eyeball. So they're really good at seeing lots of things. So we were saying in terms of a mouth part, we could have mandibles like this. I think I want to think about, my insect is going to be one that eats nectar. So I want it to have basically like a straw. Does anybody know what that is, what the straw mouth part is called? It's kind of hollow. It's something that you can roll up and then kind of extend to sip nectar out of a flower like a straw. Starts with a P. my insect has a proboscis, and I can't curl it up because it's made out of a stick. It's pretty brittle, as you just saw, but I know that that represents this nice proboscis here. And I think that my insect just needs one more thing. You could always add a bunch more. You can add whatever you want to yours, but I think that I want to add something to help my insect to feel around. And to help this insect feel around, I'm going to be adding some antenna to its head. Now, I made these earlier in Little Lab. I just used the stems of different leaves to create some antenna on the head. I'm going to show you how I made that. I can use this leaf here. If I wanted to use this stem as an antenna, all I need to do is pinch it up here and then kind of pull off the leaf part. So now I've got a nice antenna. I think I'll use it for my bug. So I've got a nice bendy antenna, and I'm going to stick it right on my insect's head. And these antennas do more than just kind of feel around, right? They are maybe similar in some ways to something like a whisker, and they help us, or they help an insect to feel around. They're also organs. They're organs that they can use to smell. So some insects, it's true, do have the ability to smell using other parts of their bodies. Some of them can smell using some specialized mouth parts. But a lot of types of insects smell using their antenna. So we've got a pretty good looking insect here, right? We know that it's got some legs to crawl around. It's got some wings to help it fly. It's got those eyes, that mouth part, and it's got these antennae. And now we're thinking about if we've got bugs on the scene, on the prehistoric scene, right? We've had insects on the prehistoric scene for about 400 million years. If we skip ahead to when we start seeing flowers, right? The way that these flowers are going to look depends on what would attract an insect. So if I have my flower here, right, this is probably not what prehistoric flowers looked like. Prehistoric flowers probably looked a little bit more like a magnolia blossom, or some scientists think maybe a little bit like a water lily, maybe similar to that. But a lot of flowers are going to evolve traits that attract insects. Now remember, we were talking about those big compound eyes, kind of like a praying mantis has, right? That's why flowers evolved, many of them, to be so bright, because they are attracting insects with their bright colors and their patterns. Some of them even have special patterns that are only visible to insects. They're only visible in the ultraviolet light spectrum, which I think is really cool. Even pollen itself is really bright yellow. That's something that's very visible for insects to see, because the pollen is what's going to help a flower make more flowers. That's what you want your pollinator to be able to find. So those bright petals are something that helps attract insects with their good eyesight. Something else, of course, is they have that nectar and that pollen. And we have insects with special mouth parts that help them to get the pollen from inside of a flower, both the pollen and the nectar from inside of a flower. And when they stick their head in there, they get pollen rubbed all over them, which means that they carry pollen when they go to the next flower. The other thing is that flowers have a scent, right? Some of them have a really nice scent. There are also flowers that have not so nice scent, but they have this smell that attracts insects. So if I have my insect here feeling around with its antenna, and it can smell with its antenna, then it will be attracted to a flower that has a strong smell. Right? So that's a trait that a flower has to attract insects. Once we have different flowers developing different traits that attract insects, once we have insects that start relying on flowers for their food source, they start to evolve together, right? And when they evolve together, we call it co-evolution. So it's true that insects came first. Then flowers developed to attract insects. And then once they both existed, they, in a way, kind of grew together. And there's different examples of flowers that there's even a type of flower that evolved to look similar to a certain type of bee, a certain type of pollinator, so that the insect sees what it thinks is another of its species and goes over to check it out. It turns out it's just a flower, but it does end up getting pollen on it, which it can bring to another flower of that species. Oh, and I love that you added this, Rune, that some flowers have disgusting smells. That is very true. I don't know if you've ever heard of a corpse flower, but they smell terrible, which is a great way of attracting, especially pollinators like flies. We always think of stuff like bees are really popular pollinators, or maybe butterflies, but bees and also bees, but also beetles and flies are really good pollinators as well. We actually think that way back in prehistory, that magnolia blossoms, those big white flowers on magnolia trees, and beetles kind of co-evolved together, right? We think that because beetles love to roll around in a magnolia blossom. I think when we had our entomologist on the show, Dr. Eleanor, she called it a beetle party, where they like to roll around in the pollen. So those are two examples of, right, this type of beetle and a magnolia flower are an example of co-evolution. Once they both exist, they kind of complement each other, because it's good for an insect for there to be lots of flowers for it to eat from, and it's good for a flower to have lots of pollinators to spread its pollen so there can be more flowers. So they kind of work together in that way. I don't know if any of you have built your creature as well, but I'd love to know if you made an invertebrate with us and what kind of traits it might have. Did you make one with wings, or did yours not have wings? Did it have more legs, different body segments? What do you think? I think maybe I could make one in the future that has like mouth pincers. I was thinking maybe I could even use pieces of my pine cone to be different mouth pincers, like this. This is not a very spiky example of a pine cone, but if I had a spikier pine cone, maybe those would be good little mandibles or pincers to put on the mouth parts. Oh, it sounds like some of us did. It sounds like one of us made some that have wings like a butterfly. That's a really great idea. We were talking about butterflies earlier. They would definitely be helpful pollinators. That's awesome. Well, my friends, I hope that you learned some interesting stuff about bugs and flowers. I know that I did, learning that insects actually come before flowers, and flowers look the way that they do in order to attract insects. I think that's pretty cool. That's going to be our final one of the series of our Lab Before Time series. And actually next week we are not going to have a lab at home because we're going to go on a hiatus. So we're not going to have another lab until November, when we're going to kind of bring you a new and exciting and improved lab at home experience. So we will not have a lab at home next week or the week after. We won't have one until November. So I hope you'll join us back in November. And I hope that maybe next week you could join us for a different kind of virtual program. We're going to be celebrating Indigenous Peoples Day, and we're going to be learning about kind of like land acknowledgement and conservation and celebrating Indigenous history. That's going to be this upcoming Monday, October 12th at 2 p.m. That's not a lab at home, but it is a similar type of program in that it'll be me, we'll be doing an activity, and we'll be talking together about some of these ideas. I hope that we might see you next week for an Indigenous Peoples virtual program, and I hope that I will see you all in November for our new and improved and exciting lab at home experience. Thank you all so much for being here. I always really enjoy talking with you all. Thanks for your awesome ideas and answers. And as always, keep those thoughts coming. We'd always love to see what you think or what you make. If you want to post a picture of it on social media, or if you do, to tag the museum and tag #LabAtHome. We'd love to be able to see what kind of cool stuff that you all made. Awesome. Thank you so much, friends. I'm going to go ahead and sign off. Thank you for your presence today. I really enjoyed it. See you later, friends.